Welcome everyone to SEA's Sailing Symposium on North Atlantic right whales. We are just over 24 hours into our voyage between Charleston, South Carolina and New York City. We're roughly 50 nautical miles offshore, approximating the track that North Atlantic right whales would make in their migration from south to north. And what we'd like to do today, as we stand here on the quarterdeck of the SSV Corwith Kramer, is to introduce a series of speakers, experts on various aspects of North Atlantic right whale biology, behavior, and conservation. So today, our first two speakers we'll be hearing from, Robert Rocha from the New Bedford Whaling Museum will speak first, and then we'll hear from Jesse Meckling from the Center for Coastal Studies. So without any further ado, turn it over to Robert.
Last one on, first one to speak. So I think what the six of us will do is we'll tell you a little bit about ourselves, a little bit about our career paths, because we were all asked to do that, our first encounters with a right whale, and then we'll talk about our stuff. So I'm Bob Rocha, Robert Rocha from the New Bedford Whaling Museum. I'm their Associate Curator of Science and Research. Been there 18.5 years. When I started, I would not have felt the least bit comfortable standing here giving you a presentation about any kind of whale. But because I was hired to bring science programs to the museum, did a lot of reading, watched a lot of videos. I was also fortunate enough that the North Atlantic Right Whale Consortium hosts this annual meeting at the Whaling Museum every year, so then I got to sit in on those and be surrounded by a lot of smart people who were doing a lot of research, and I got to learn from them. And I'm going to add, I'm still surrounded by a lot of smart people, and I want to give a shout out to the crew because I feel safe on this voyage because they're a smart, well-trained crew. So I want to thank you all for that and for your hospitality. So over the course of time, as I read and continue to read and continue to learn and continue to create presentations, I had to know that what I was saying could be verified by a couple of different sources. So based on that, I felt good about creating school programs, inviting kids in, and then over the course of time getting asked to help with content for museum exhibits, to the point where 4 years ago I actually co-curated the exhibit people see when they walk into the Whaling Museum. And one of the things you will see is a life-size sculpture of a right whale, like it's coming out of the water, mouth open, like our model here, and also panels that talk about the animal itself. And I want to acknowledge that today is the first ever Massachusetts Right Whale Day. My first time seeing a right whale is actually similar to the story of Matthew Delaney, who made it his mission to get a state recognition day created for this species. I happened to see my first right whales while I was standing on the shore, Race Point in Provincetown. I had seen a lot of videos from decks of ships and videos from drones and from planes, from spotter planes, but I finally got to see one, and when you're that close, you hear them too, because they are loud when they exhale. And several other times I've been out there, so that's been my chance to see and hear these animals. And it was, the other cool thing was that first time I actually had a colleague from the Azores with me, so it was her first time seeing them because they don't swim over there. If you want to see sperm whales, definitely go to the Azores. So again, Massachusetts Right Whale Day. Why does an animal need its own holiday? What is so special about the animal and its situation that is necessary? Well, this is an animal that's highly endangered. Maybe there's 340 of them left. And the amount of energy that I've seen expended by a variety of people in the 18.5 years I've been doing this job makes it clear that this animal grabs people's attention, gets people concerned, and the amount of effort that's already gone into it shouldn't be wasted. It should be moved forward. It should be used to help with new research and creative ways of finding ways for all of us to coexist in the water along the coastline. So let's talk a little bit about the animal itself. As you can see, this is one of those animals that, it's one of the four, actually 5 species of baleen whale that does not have a dorsal fin. So it does not have a dorsal fin. It has an arched upper jaw. So there are 3 species of right whale and its genetic cousin, the bowhead. Those 4 species have very arched upper jaws. The other whale, that's called the right whale, the pygmy right whale, looks a whole lot different, but it does have a slightly similar arch to its upper jaw. And that one fits into the category of data deficient because we really don't know a lot about it. And you'll notice it has very club-like flippers and then a fairly broad tail. And the other thing that's really noticeable are these giant white blobs. Underneath that are raised patches of very leathery, very tough skin, known as callosities. Just think callus is only bigger. And the pattern is there when the animal is born, but they don't rise up until the animal's, I'm going to say, a few weeks old. And then these little white animals called cyamids move on. And one of the most interesting things that I've learned about this animal, and this is definitely one of the things that I wanted to bring up, is that there used to only be one species of right whale. And then over the course of time, as plates shifted and the equator formed, the animals south of the equator got separated from the animals north, and then the animals in the Pacific got separated from the animals in the Atlantic where we are. So there's a North Atlantic right whale, Eubelina glacialis. There's a southern right whale, Eubelina australis, and then there's in the Pacific, Eubelina japonica. And they've been separated long enough genetically that they are considered 3 different species. What I found the most fascinating about that story is that the original 3 species of cyamid that lived on that first species of right whale have now separated out into 9. So 3 Pacific, 3 Southern, 3 here. And they're all in the genus Siamis. And in 2005, when your paper was published, you and like 10 other authors, and I'm pointing at Amy Knowlton from the Anderson Cabot Center for the Ocean and the New England Aquarium. I think at the time there was still some work being done by taxonomists to decide if it was 3 or if they were going to rename them all, and I think they've all been renamed. So there are now 9. That's just a really interesting piece of evolutionary history to know that 1 became 3 and 3 became 9, and they're all hitchhikers. These little animals. So there are some that live on the higher outer parts of these raised patches of skin. There's a different species, slightly smaller, that live in the grooves, and the 3rd species needs to live on slightly softer skin because apparently they have a harder time holding on to this rough, thick skin. And you'll notice these callosities appear where we would have hair. So on top of the head, over the eyes, upper lip, beard area, with a few strays. And every right whale's callosity pattern is unique to that animal, which is how, with all of the photos that have been taken from planes and from decks of boats, the right whale catalog has been used to identify individuals every year. We have a right whale skeleton that hangs in the Whaling Museum that was accidentally killed in November of 2004. DNA was taken from her after she had washed ashore in North Carolina, and it was matched to DNA in the database. So we know she had been born in 1989. We know her mother, her father. We now know the half-siblings on the father's side and on the mother's side. And so she was 15 years old when she died. The worst part about that was she was 10 months pregnant with her first calf. Again, we know that it was her first because there was no data about her having had any earlier, which is strange because 15 is a little old to be a first-time mom. And not to make the story worse, but that fetus was also a female. So to lose a reproductive female and then a fetus that in 10, 12 years could have started adding to the population, certainly a bad day for the species. The other thing that the name itself, right whale, the prevailing wisdom is that it's called the right whale to hunt because they're slow moving, which typically they are, they're docile. They are until you put a harpoon in their back, or if you try to approach to, in this case, disentangle them. They float when you kill them, not always, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And they have a lot of blubber, so you can get a lot of oil. Ultimately, in reading back through the literature, and I have a colleague that's written a whole paper on this, right whaling referred to not only right whales but to bowhead whales. So and the right whale was a whale that had tall baleen in its mouth. So a North Atlantic right whale, maximum height of the baleen, from what I've read, is about 8 feet, whereas for bowheads it can be 14 feet. And it was always considered higher quality. There's a journal entry from a guy named Jonathan Bourne. One of our buildings at the Whaling Museum is named for Jonathan Bourne. He comments that like they were getting 45 cents a pound for bowhead baleen and 40 cents a pound for right whale baleen. This was back like 1848, 1849. And in the literature, the bowhead was also called the Greenland right whale and the Arctic right whale, whereas this one was sometimes called the black right whale, the Nordkaper, the Sarda, that was a European term, and also the 7-foot bone whale, because the other term for baleen is whalebone, which is kind of funny because it has nothing to do with bone. It's not ossified, it's keratin. So I would say that ultimately it was called the right whale because it was the right whale to hunt because it had baleen. The other stuff, maybe, and that didn't really come into use until a gentleman whose last name was Flowers started saying it sometime in the 1870s. I think he had written this down. Even though he was talking about bowheads, it got transposed to the other right whale types. And I should add that bowheads are genetic cousins with right whales. The right whale genus name is Eubalina, which means true whale or right whale, whereas for the bowhead it's Balena. So going back to the fact that they don't always float when you kill them. So there are, because I work at the Whaling Museum, we have lots of primary source documents. We have access to whale logs and whale journals, although the logs are the ones that talk more about business. The journals are often a little more personal. There were reports of lowering for right whales, harpooning them, getting them, but once they died, they sank. Or they got, as soon as they got harpooned and the boats got close, the whales used their tails and they flipped the boats and they smashed through the boats. Because these are really, really strong animals. I point out to people when they're in the Whaling Museum, especially with students, think about the videos you've seen, like, well, I don't need to mention the company's name, but there's an insurance company that shows you a humpback breaching. Think about the fact that it's this part of the whale that has pushed that animal out of the water. That's, if you want to think of it like a car, that's rear wheel drive. And if that muscle along the spine can push 40 or 50,000 pounds out of the water, it's going to have no problem, flipping a boat that weighs 2,000 pounds fully loaded with crew and gear. Fun fact, there are no muscles in the flukes. It's all skin blubber, blood vessel, collagen, and elastin. Did I leave anything out? Yeah, and I heard that from Michael. So, common question we get when people come into the museum to look at the skeletons, and they'll ask, where are the bones in the tail? Because the back end of a whale ends just like the back end of any other animal that has a tail. It's because, again, the flukes don't actually have any bones in them.